The quiet of my house in Shaker Heights is not merely an absence of noise, it is a meticulously curated silence. A silence that, after 72 years, I have learned to manipulate, polish, and trust. It is the backdrop against which any sudden discord, any misplaced breath, sings like a siren. They call me Evelyn Thorne, a woman defined by her twin-set cardigans, the immaculate state of her antique mahogany, and the way I dust the spines of books that haven't been opened in 30 years. I am the stable axis around which my daughter, Diana, and my grandson, Ethan, spin their frantic, modern lives. But the truth, which I keep locked tighter than the safety deposit box at the Third National Bank, is that I spent 2 decades as an archivist at Case Western Reserve's law school. I know exactly how history is written, and more importantly, how it is erased. I know that true chaos never announces itself with a bang, it arrives in a whisper, hidden inside a file marked miscellaneous or, in this digital age, buried under the sleek glass of a smartphone screen. It was Tuesday. Tuesdays were usually dedicated to the absolute conquest of dust motes and the ritualistic watering of my prize cattleya orchids. The scent of vanilla and damp moss filled the air, a scent of artificial peace. Ethan came home at 3:45 p.m. He wasn't late, but his arrival was wrong. Teenagers, particularly 17-year-old boys who believe themselves simultaneously geniuses and invisible, possess a certain swagger of boredom when they enter a home. Ethan usually dropped his backpack by the foyer, muttered a vague greeting toward the kitchen, and evaporated up the stairs. Today, he stood by the threshold, his backpack clutched tight, his shoulders hunched not in fatigue, but in defensive tension. He was staring down at his phone, his face bathed in the sickly blue light of the screen. I was in the living room, ostensibly reorganizing the magazines on the coffee table, an act of pure theater. I watched him over the rim of my reading glasses, the bifocal lens magnifying the intensity in his normally placid eyes. He wasn't reading a lengthy article or scrolling social media. He was staring at a chat window, and his thumb was hovering. My training kicked in. My mind, still sharp despite the soft cushion of 70 years of comfortable living, calculated the microseconds. He was agonizing over a decision. The muscle around his jaw twitched once, twice. A deep, almost involuntary tremor ran through him. Then, the finger descended. Tap. 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 A flurry of activity, too fast, too efficient. The kind of rapid-fire deletion one executes not to clear storage, but to vanish evidence. And just as he finished, just as his face smoothed into that familiar, guarded mask of teenage indifference, the front door opened, letting in a gust of crisp autumn air and the commanding presence of my daughter, Diana. "Ethan? Are you home?" Diana's voice, sharp and precise, accustomed to addressing corporate boards and hostile judges, sliced through the quiet. Ethan immediately slipped the phone into the back pocket of his faded jeans. The movement was practiced, smooth, but I had already catalogued the preceding 3 seconds. He hadn't just put his phone away, he had hidden it. "Yeah, Mom. Just came in," he replied, his voice a little too casual. Diana, clad in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, dropped her briefcase with a weary thud by the stairs. She didn't look at Ethan, she looked past him, already mentally reviewing her day at Sterling and Hayes, the venerable, ruthless law firm where she was a rising star. "Good. Don't forget your college essay draft is due tomorrow. I won't proofread it after midnight, I have that deposition in the morning." "I know, Mom." "Relax," Ethan mumbled, already halfway up the stairs. Diana sighed, peeling off her blazer. "I wish he would put some effort into his future, Mother. He spends all his time locked away in that digital void." I smiled sweetly, placing the latest edition of Architectural Digest precisely perpendicular to the edge of the table. "He's just navigating adolescence, dear. We all did." But my voice tasted like ash. I knew that what I had just witnessed was not adolescence. It was fear, cold and pure. And my daughter, blinded by her ambition and her belief in structured reality, had walked right past the flare. I watched Diana disappear into the kitchen, already barking into her Bluetooth earpiece about an offshore account. I listened to the muffled sound of Ethan's bedroom door clicking shut upstairs. The silence returned, but it was ruined. It was no longer curated peace, it was the tense calm before a thunderstorm. I am a woman of routine, and routine is safety. If I deviated, if I asked Ethan directly, he would simply lie, and I would lose the tiny sliver of trust we maintained. If I told Diana, she would overreact, perhaps confiscate the phone, perhaps call the school, creating more noise and pushing Ethan further away. No. To truly understand, I had to adopt the methods of my husband, Thomas. Thomas, who had been a detective with the municipal police department for 30 years, often told me that the most damning evidence was the evidence never meant to be seen. Evelyn, he'd said once, polishing his revolver, every truth leaves a shadow. You just have to know where to stand to see it. That night, dinner was a strained affair of polite chatter about the stock market and the upcoming school board elections. Ethan ate little, his eyes darting to his pocket where the phone resided. Diana was distracted, already halfway back to the office mentally. By 11:30 p.m., the house was deep in its nightly slumber. The expensive security system was armed. The neighborhood was quiet, punctuated only by the distant, lonely wail of a passing train. I waited until midnight, just to be sure. I put on my old velvet slippers, the ones with the thin soles, and tied my silk dressing gown around my waist. My heart, usually a steady metronome, was tapping out a jittery samba against my ribs. I had to be careful. Ethan was a light sleeper, and his door, unlike Diana's heavy mahogany slab, often squeaked. I ascended the stairs slowly, counting each step, recalling the exact places where the old wood groaned. 13, 14, 17. I stopped outside his room. The small gap under the door showed only darkness. I bent down, listening. The soft, rhythmic sound of a ventilation fan mixed with the shallow breathing of a sleeping boy. I needed the phone. I opened the door, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. The door sighed slightly. I froze, holding my breath for 10 seconds. Silence. Ethan was a dark mound under his comforter. His room was a typical teenage war zone, scattered clothes, abandoned books, the faint metallic tang of energy drinks. His phone wasn't charging on the desk. It wasn't under the pillow. I scanned the room, my eyes adjusting to the deep gloom. I saw a flash of light near the bedside table. He had plugged it into the charger there, right beside him. I moved with the silent grace that only 70 years of domestic stealth can perfect. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly. I retrieved the device. It was warm from his proximity. I retreated, closing the door just as carefully. Back in the sanctuary of my own bedroom, under the glow of a small, shaded reading lamp, the terror of the previous hour transmuted into fierce focus. The password. I had a narrow window before Ethan instinctively reached for it. He was a complicated boy, my Ethan. Openly cynical, privately nostalgic. He loved animals, but his first cat, a mottled Siamese named Barnaby, had died when he was 7. He had never fully recovered. I typed in the sequence. 05142014, Barnaby's date of death. The screen flashed open. Relief flooded me, so intense it was almost painful. I went straight to his messaging application. My fingers, steady now, navigated the labyrinthine menus. I needed the recovery software, or at least the cached data. Being an archivist wasn't just about sorting papers, it was about understanding system logic, about finding the hidden trash bins and the backups. I found the application's memory log, and with a few educated taps, the deleted conversations began to reconstitute themselves. They scrolled down the screen, line by line, like artifacts rising from the mud. At first, it was benign. School chatter. Gaming group plans. Then I reached the conversation titled simply, The Architect. The nausea began as a cold knot in my stomach and quickly spread, tightening my chest until breathing became a conscious, desperate effort. The messages were not about teenage rebellion. They were about data breach, corporate espionage, and blackmail. Ethan, I told you, I can't get the login. Mom keeps it on a flash drive she locks up. The architect, don't disappoint me, Thorne. Your mother is high-level security risk. But you have something she doesn't have, access. We need access to the Sterling and Hayes confidential server. Specifically, the Redwood files. Ethan, why? What's in the Redwood files? The architect, details about the Oakhaven environmental disaster. Details your mother is actively covering up for their client, Omnichem. You want justice, don't you, kid? You want to expose the corruption. Ethan, yes. But I don't want to hurt Mom. The architect, then don't. Give me the access, and Omnichem goes down, Diana is safe, and justice is served. If you refuse, I will expose everything I know about the Smith case, and how your grandmother played a part in covering up the death of an innocent man 20 years ago. I dropped the phone on the silk comforter. It landed silently. Smith. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. Not just the abstract pain of finding my grandson embroiled in criminality, but the sharp, specific agony of my own buried past rising up to consume my present. The Smith case. Thomas had closed that file, sealed the evidence, and protected me. Protected us. But Thomas was gone, and the evidence, apparently, was not. My quiet life. My perfect silence. It was all a mask. And now, someone knew exactly where to scratch to tear the mask off my face and shatter my family. I sat there, trembling violently, staring at the damning exchange. The architect was not after money or data for its own sake. They were after me. They were manipulating Ethan using his own nascent moral compass, holding my ancient secret hostage, and using Diana's professional life as collateral. It wasn't a corporate threat. It was personal. It was revenge. I picked up the phone again, my hands surprisingly steady despite the roaring fear in my ears. I scrolled back, searching for any further context on the Smith case mention. The architect, pay for Smith, Thorne. Your family buried him once. Now, they'll pay the interest. I looked at the number associated with the architect. No name. Just a Berner VoIP number linked to a complex encryption algorithm. I, Evelyn Thorne, the harmless archivist who specialized in the Dewey Decimal System and the proper care of linens, was now holding a piece of evidence that placed my grandson on the path to being an unwitting criminal, my daughter in professional jeopardy, and me, at the center of a 20-year-old, lethal conspiracy. I had to move faster than Diana, who would only see the legal ramifications. I had to move faster than the architect, who was playing a dangerous game with my family's soul. I had to find out who Silas Cole, no, wait, Silas Cole was the son of the deceased, that was the name I remembered. I had to find out who this architect was and neutralize the threat before the quiet of my home became the absolute ruin of my life. I gently wiped the phone clean and returned it to Ethan's bedside table, exactly where I found it. Then, I walked across the hall, not to my bed, but to the small, dusty study where Thomas had kept his retired files and his secrets. The time for polishing mahogany was over. The time for fighting had begun. Chapter 2, The Architect's Blueprint. The study smelled of dry paper and forgotten leather, an olfactory museum dedicated to Thomas's life. After he died 5 years ago, I hadn't had the heart to disturb the room. Now, the scent was a trigger, pulling me back to the difficult years when Thomas, wrestling with his conscience, had buried the Smith file. I pulled down the battered, leather-bound box marked Tax Records, 1998 to 2002. Inside, nestled beneath legitimate IRS forms, was a manila envelope, brittle with age. I hadn't looked at these contents since the week Thomas sealed them. The envelope contained photocopies of police reports, a few blurry autopsy photos, and crucially, a series of typewritten notes on plain paper, Thomas's internal memos. The Smith Case. 1999, Gerald Smith, a young, idealistic union member, had publicly questioned the safety practices of Magna Corp, a massive construction and development firm. 2 weeks later, he was killed in a supposedly accidental crane collapse on a site managed by Magna Corp. The police investigation, led by a lieutenant eager for retirement and possibly a payoff, ruled it an accident. Thomas, then a junior detective, had been assigned the initial legwork. I remembered the sleepless nights. Thomas pacing, smoking furiously in the garage, muttering about obfuscation and witness intimidation. I ran my finger over Thomas's faded handwriting on one of the memos. Evelyn, there are clear violations here. Smith was silenced. The crane was deliberately sabotaged. Magna Corp is untouchable. If I pursue this, my career is gone, and so is our security. And then, the critical turning point. Magna Corp's legal counsel at the time was the predecessor firm to Sterling and Hayes, Diana's current employer. Thomas had faced a profound moral dilemma. Go public, risk everything, and likely still lose against Magna Corp's endless resources, or bury the evidence, ensuring his family's stability, but knowing he was complicit in a profound injustice. He chose the latter. He destroyed the originals of the most damning evidence, a forensic report proving deliberate tampering, and kept these photocopies as his insurance. I had stood by him, silent, because I loved him and I was terrified of poverty and exposure. And now, 20 years later, the truth was hunting us down. I stared at the messages on Ethan's recovered phone, juxtaposing the past with the present. The architect knew the key names: Smith, Thorne, the firm. This was revenge, meticulously planned, aimed at maximum destruction. The mention of Silas Cole returned to me. I had seen the name on Thomas's notes, the 2-year-old son of Gerald Smith. Silas was now in his early 20s. He had the right motivation, the right timeline, and the perfect technological skill to be the architect. I needed to find him. But I couldn't use Diana's high-tech, traceable computers, and I couldn't risk revealing my knowledge to Ethan. I pulled out my old laptop, a relic from 2010 that Thomas had wiped clean and loaded with basic, untraceable Linux software, purely for secure browsing. It was tucked away in a dusty cabinet, a contingency measure for a time Thomas always feared would come. I drove the laptop to the only safe harbor I knew, the downtown public library. The library was my sanctuary. It smelled of ozone, old paper, and a comforting neutrality. It was the only place where Evelyn Thorne, the quiet grandmother, could transform back into Evelyn Thorne, the relentless archivist. I logged into a remote terminal. I started with simple, publicly available searches. Silas Cole. Magna Corp. 1999. I quickly located Silas Cole. His online presence was fragmented but revealing. He was a gifted programmer, an alumnus of MIT, and deeply involved in local anti-corporate activism and digital rights. He wrote articulate, angry manifestos about judicial corruption and the cover-up culture in American business. His online handle, predictably, The Architect. His posts hinted at years of research, fueled by the cold case of his father's death. He wasn't a criminal. He was an avenger. My dread deepened. Silas wasn't seeking a payout, he sought absolute systemic collapse, starting with my family. The most recent activity was a private forum post, dated yesterday, detailing the next steps of his plan. He needed high-level data from Sterling and Hayes to link Diana's current cover-up, the Oakhaven environmental disaster, with the firm's historical corruption, the Smith case. The combination would be explosive, enough to tank the firm and potentially disbar Diana. He was using Ethan to get the Redwood files, believing Ethan was driven by the same idealism that killed his own father. I scrolled further. Silas had sent Ethan a final message, not through the encrypted chat, but through a throwaway email account he'd set up for the boy. I copied the location and time. Saturday. 9 p.m. Old Warehouse District, Dock 14. Bring the access, or the truth about your grandmother goes live. Saturday. That was tomorrow. I had less than 24 hours. My primary goal shifted from identifying the blackmailer to protecting Ethan. If Ethan delivered the data, he wouldn't be a hero of justice, he would be a fall guy. Silas would use the stolen data to publicly implicate Ethan as the disgruntled leak, thereby protecting himself and ensuring Diana's destruction was messy and public. I closed the laptop. My mind was racing, cataloging assets and liabilities. Liabilities: Diana's unwavering belief in her own moral purity, Ethan's naive idealism, my own physical vulnerability, the devastating truth of Thomas's cover-up. Assets: my knowledge of archives and information control, Thomas's insurance file, the full set of copied documents, my absolute willingness to sacrifice my own reputation to save my grandson. I walked out of the library, the crisp autumn air feeling strangely invigorating. I was no longer an archivist, I was an operative. I needed to intercept the meeting. I needed to meet Silas Cole myself. But I couldn't go empty-handed. I needed leverage stronger than Diana's corporate data, leverage that would appeal to the fundamental justice Silas was seeking. I needed to give him the real weapon, the unassailable truth about his father's death. I returned home, the smell of vanilla and damp moss now seeming like a cruel joke. Diana was already home, sitting at the dining table, drowning in legal documents. "Mother, you're home late." "Where were you?" she asked, without looking up. "Just picking up a few things," I said, my voice smooth, without inflection. "I was considering buying a new pair of gardening shears." "Fine. Just make sure Ethan is eating properly." "He seems to be fading," Diana mumbled, highlighting a paragraph of dense text. "He's under stress, dear," I ventured carefully. "Perhaps he needs to talk. About life choices. Consequences." Diana sighed, pushing a hand through her impeccably styled blonde hair. "Consequences are what keep the system running, Mother. He needs to stop indulging in these romantic notions of rebellion and focus on his application essays. He'll understand consequences soon enough when he has a mortgage." The chasm between us yawned wide. Diana, the architect of corporate survival, had no understanding of the deep moral current pulling Ethan toward disaster. She saw the world as black and white, legally. I saw it as infinite shades of gray, stained by history. I realized I couldn't save Ethan and protect Diana's perfect reputation. If I gave Silas the truth, Diana's career would be crippled, tangled up in the subsequent investigation. But my grandson's future was worth more than her partnership track. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I worked. I went back to Thomas's insurance file. I pulled out the core documents, the original signed deposition from a whistleblower witness who disappeared shortly after, the falsified safety report, and the proof that Magna Corp had paid off the investigators. I also retrieved Thomas's old pocket dictaphone. It was bulky, analog, and impossible to track digitally. A perfect, old-school piece of evidence collection. I copied the essentials and placed them in a heavy manila envelope, sealed with red wax, feeling a strange echo of my old life as an archivist, preserving truth. I would offer Silas Cole a trade, the truth he craves, for my grandson's innocence. And I would make sure every word of our meeting was recorded. If Silas refused and still planned to destroy Ethan, I would have his confession, too. I looked at my reflection in the dark window glass. Evelyn Thorne. 72. About to walk into a clandestine meeting with a revenge-driven hacker who wanted to dismantle my family. I put on my sensible, comfortable walking shoes. Tomorrow, I would confront the past to save the future. Chapter 3: The Guardian's Preparation. Saturday morning arrived, cold and overcast, perfectly matching the metallic dread pooling in my chest. The weather in Shaker Heights was usually polite, today it was an accomplice. I moved through the routines of the day like a ghost, making coffee, reading the paper, chatting briefly with Diana about the tediousness of her deposition schedule. Every mundane detail was an anchor I was about to cut loose. I saw Ethan in the kitchen. He was quieter than usual, his face pale. He avoided my gaze, but I saw the raw conflict in his eyes. He wasn't a criminal, he was a boy trapped by a promise of moral clarity. "Ethan," I said, leaning against the marble counter, stirring my tea. "Do you believe that sometimes, the pursuit of justice can be more destructive than the original crime?" He startled, nearly dropping his mug. "What kind of question is that, Grandma?" "Just idle thought," I said, watching him closely. "When you're dealing with big organizations, with secrets, sometimes the fight to expose them takes a toll on the innocent. People get hurt, not because they are guilty, but because they are near the explosion." "You sound like Mom," he scoffed, his voice tight. "She thinks that as long as it's legal, it's moral." "No," I countered softly. "I sound like someone who has seen the consequences of both silence and action. Silence preserves a false peace. Action, often, creates real wreckage. You must choose your wreckage carefully, Ethan." He looked at me then, truly looked. He saw something in my eyes, perhaps not understanding, but recognition of shared weight. "I just want things to be right," he whispered, pushing the mug away. "I know, dear. And that is why you must be very careful about who you trust to define right for you." I left the conversation there. Any more, and I risked exposing my knowledge, triggering a premature panic. He needed to believe he still held the secret, while I needed to make sure he never reached Dock 14. I spent the afternoon gathering my operational tools. The dictaphone, tucked deep into the inner pocket of my winter coat. My old, heavy keyring, holding the keys to the ancient, rusty 78 Buick LeSabre Thomas kept in the secondary garage, a car that hadn't been driven since he died, and certainly wasn't in any family insurance policy or tracking system. And the envelope. The heavy manila file containing the original proof of Magna Corp's malice and Thomas's complicity. The physical manifestation of 20 years of quiet shame. At 7 p.m., Diana left for a mandatory work dinner. She kissed me on the cheek, smelling faintly of expensive perfume and professional stress. "Tell Ethan not to stay up playing those ridiculous games," she ordered, grabbing her sleek leather handbag. "I will," I promised. As soon as the roar of her Lexus faded down the street, I went to Ethan's room. He was sitting at his desk, staring blankly at the computer screen. He was dressed in dark clothes, restless energy vibrating off him. He was planning to leave soon. "Ethan, I think you look exhausted," I said, walking toward him. "Why don't you try my sleeping tea? It's the chamomile valerian blend I brought back from Vermont." "No thanks, Grandma, I'm fine," he said too quickly. "Nonsense," I insisted, already halfway to the kitchen. "I'll bring it up. Just 5 minutes." In the kitchen, I prepared the tea. And I added a very small, precise amount of my leftover pain medication, a low-dose sedative prescribed for my occasional hip pain. Just enough to ensure deep, restorative sleep. No hangover. No alarm bells. Just a delayed, heavy exhaustion. I delivered the mug. "Drink it all, dear. The valerian root is best when it's warm." I watched him drink it down quickly, eager to dismiss me. "Good boy," I said, ruffling his hair, an action I rarely permitted myself anymore. "Don't forget to set your alarm for the morning." I waited downstairs. 10 minutes passed. 15. I heard the thump of a heavy sigh from upstairs, then the faint squeak of his bed springs settling. He was gone. Deeply, peacefully asleep, missing his appointment with destruction. Now, I was the only one on the clock. It was 8 p.m. I had an hour to get across the city and find the exact docking bay. I slipped into the side garage. The Buick LeSabre was enormous, a pale blue tank of 1970s steel. I turned the key. It coughed, sputtered, and miraculously roared to life with a sound that could wake the dead. I backed it out slowly, hoping the thick garage walls muffled the noise. Driving the old car was a sensory overload. The power steering was vague, the brakes spongy, and the interior smelled of Thomas's pipe tobacco and old air freshener. It felt like I was driving a ghost. The warehouse district was a desolate, industrial graveyard far from the manicured lawns of Shaker Heights. The streetlights here were sparse, covered in grime. The area was notorious for petty crime and abandoned businesses. I found Dock 14 with 15 minutes to spare. It was a cavernous, dark loading bay. The only light came from the bruised, purple street lamp at the end of the road. I parked the Buick half a block away, pulled my coat tightly around me, and walked toward the designated meeting spot. My arthritic knees protested every step, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. I reached the rusted loading dock door. I pulled out the dictaphone and pressed record. Click. The small, comforting sound of technology ready to preserve the truth. I positioned myself in the shadow of a stack of rotting wooden pallets, giving me a clear view of the entire bay. Precisely at 9 p.m., a figure emerged from the deeper darkness of the warehouse interior. He wasn't wearing a slick hacker outfit. He wore a heavy hoodie, jeans, and had the nervous, focused intensity of a young academic who has taken his ideology too far. Silas Cole. The architect of his own destruction, and potentially mine. He carried a small backpack and looked constantly over his shoulder. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. He was waiting for Ethan. I stepped out of the shadow. The movement was deliberate, slow, calculated to capture his full attention without spooking him into flight. He won't be coming, Silas. Silas spun around, startled. His eyes, wide and dark, narrowed instantly. He saw an elderly woman, dressed plainly, standing alone in the darkness. Contempt and confusion crossed his face. Who are you? His voice was young, rough with tension. My name is Evelyn Thorne. I'm Ethan's grandmother. A flicker of recognition, followed by profound disappointment. The famous Mrs. Thorne. The quiet, little librarian. You think you can stop me? I know I can stop you, I corrected him, stepping into the meager pool of light. Because you were waiting for a boy with a guilty conscience and stolen files. I, however, came prepared with the truth. Silas laughed, a brittle, harsh sound that echoed off the empty buildings. The truth? Your family wouldn't know the truth if it bit them. Your husband buried my father's life for a promotion and a pension. Your daughter is doing the same thing for Omnicam right now. You're all just rats in the same filthy corporation. Your anger is justified, Silas. But your methods are flawed. You are using an innocent boy, threatening to ruin his life to get back at his mother. That is not justice. That is just another form of corruption. I am exposing a network of lies, Mrs. Thorne. A network you helped build with your silence, he spat, taking a step toward me. I held up the manila envelope. The red wax seal, stark against the brown paper, caught the light. You wanted the Redwood files. Data that proves Diana is currently working to cover up the Oak Haven pollution disaster, I stated calmly. That data will destroy her career, yes. But it won't give you justice for your father. It's just collateral damage. This, I shook the envelope lightly, is what you really need. He stopped, his eyes fixed on the envelope. Suspicion warred with deep-seated hope. What is that? The original forensic report from the Smith case, Silas. The one that was lost. The one that explicitly proves the crane cable was intentionally compromised. The witness deposition that shows Magna Corp's direct involvement and the payoff to the police lieutenant. The definitive proof that your father was murdered. The air went dead silent. Silas stood absolutely still, processing the enormity of the claim. You're lying. If your husband had this, why didn't he release it? Because he was a coward, Silas. And I was afraid. We were afraid of losing everything. We chose security over morality. And now, I am here to pay the debt. I moved closer, my voice dropping to a low, powerful register. You wanted to ruin us? You wanted payment? This is the ultimate price. This file will not only bring down Magna Corp's executives, it will force the reopening of the case, clear your father's name, and publicly expose the judicial corruption that allowed the system to ignore him. I extended the envelope. Take it, Silas. This is real vengeance. This is the truth that will burn down the system you hate. It's more powerful than anything Ethan could steal. He hesitated. His gaze darted from the envelope to my face, searching for a trick. If I take this, he challenged, how do I know you haven't just rigged this? How do I know you aren't still protecting your family? Because if you use this, I replied, my gaze unyielding, my husband will be posthumously implicated in obstructing justice. My daughter, Diana, will face an investigation into her firm's long history of covering up crimes, which may lead to her disbarment. My entire family's legacy will be destroyed. I am trading everything, my peace, my safety, my reputation, for your ability to achieve real, meaningful justice. And for my grandson's soul. He took one step, then another. His hand reached out, shaking, and closed around the manila envelope. The wax cracked under his pressure. He was breathing heavily, the years of bottled-up pain and anger visible in his shoulders. You were going to use Ethan to commit a felony, Silas. You would have made him the next scapegoat, just like your father. You are not a seeker of justice, you are an architect of revenge, I said, my voice hardening. You brought me here to use my grandson. I brought you here to offer redemption. Take the evidence. Stop manipulating the boy. Or I will use this recording of our conversation, and your previous communications with Ethan, to expose you for attempted blackmail and coercion of a minor. You will be silenced forever, and your father will remain forgotten. I had played my final card. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Silas clutched the envelope like a lifeline. He looked at the vast, dark warehouse, then at my face, an old woman who had just traded her entire life for a chance at honor. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a rasp. I don't need the Redwood files. He reached into his backpack, pulled out his own phone, and with a swift, final movement, he deleted the entire conversation thread with Ethan Thorne. And then he smashed the phone against the concrete floor. Tell your grandson, he said, turning back toward the darkness, the envelope clutched to his chest. Tell him that sometimes, fighting for justice means sacrificing comfort. He vanished into the shadows, leaving behind the echo of his footsteps and the shattered remains of his digital life. I stood there for a full minute, listening to the silence. My knees were aching terribly, and I felt the profound exhaustion of having fought a silent, decades-long war. I reached into my pocket and pressed the stop button on the dictaphone. Click. I had walked into the lair of the architect, and I had walked out with my grandson intact. But the price was paid. I had traded the quiet of my home for the eruption of my family's truth. I got back into the old, rattling Buick. The drive home was slow, illuminated by the knowledge that tomorrow, the world would catch fire. Chapter 4, The Aftermath of Fire. I arrived home just past 10 p.m. The house was quiet, safe, and cold. Ethan was still deep asleep, breathing easily. I took the mug from his bedside table, rinsing it thoroughly. I looked at the boy, my boy, and felt a wave of protective fierce love. He was safe from the immediate danger, but he was not safe from the truth. I went to the basement and opened the incinerator Thomas used for his old papers. I placed the dictaphone inside, along with the remnants of my photocopied insurance documents. I watched the paper curl and ignite, the flames licking away the last physical evidence of my involvement. My conscience, however, refused to be incinerated. The fire started 3 days later. Not in Shaker Heights, but in the national news headlines. Magna Corp executives indicted after 2-decade-old murder case reopened. New evidence surfaces in the 1999 death of Gerald Smith, implicating high-level corporate cover-up. The details were brutal and precise. Silas Cole had not gone to the police, he had gone straight to the most ruthless investigative journalists, giving them the file and the anonymity they needed to break the story without hindrance. The world was focusing on Magna Corp, but the reverberations were immediate and devastating at Sterling and Hayes. The historical link was too strong. The press started digging into the firm's past clients, connecting the Smith cover-up to the current accusations surrounding Omnicam and the Oakhaven disaster. Diana came home Wednesday night, not in her usual suit, but wearing a borrowed sweater, her face ashen and drawn. She dropped onto the sofa, looking less like a high-powered attorney and more like a little girl who had lost her way. "Mother, it's chaos. The firm is collapsing. Everyone is pointing fingers. The Smith case, it's everywhere. They are demanding to know who was handling the legal defenses then." She looked at me, her eyes bloodshot. "The old lead partners are already being subpoenaed. And they know. They know Dad was involved in the original police investigation. They know he was the lead contact. They're saying he lost the evidence." I sat across from her. My face was impassive. This was the moment of wreckage. "Your father did what he thought was necessary to protect his family, Diana. And yes, he kept copies of the real evidence, just in case he ever needed insurance against those same corrupt forces." Diana stared at me, the comprehension slowly dawning, horrible and clear. You knew about the real evidence? All this time?" "I was his wife," I said simply. "We shared secrets. We shared the burden." "Where are those documents, Mother? We need them now. The firm needs to mitigate this. We can claim Dad was working undercover, gathering the real proof. We can salvage this." Diana's corporate instinct was screaming, reaching for a legal narrative, a spin. "They are gone, Diana. They have already been delivered to the proper authorities. The truth is out." She surged up, her voice rising to a dangerous pitch. "You did this? You released my father's documents? You know this will ruin the legacy he spent his life protecting?" "He didn't protect a legacy, Diana. He perpetuated a lie," I corrected her, my voice low and firm. "I gave the truth to the one person who could use it to achieve actual justice. The man whose father was murdered 20 years ago." I paused, letting the implication land. "Your father's legacy isn't worth more than the life he helped erase." Diana collapsed back onto the sofa. She wasn't angry anymore, she was heartbroken and lost. "Why now, Mother? Why after all this time? Why ruin everything?" I decided to give her half the truth. The half she could handle. Because the past always finds a way back in, Diana. And it was starting to poison Ethan. He was becoming involved, deeply, dangerously involved with the people trying to expose this firm. He was following his conscience, just like you taught him. But he was about to make a terrible, career-ending mistake. I had to choose, protect your reputation, or save your son. I did not tell her the name the architect. I did not tell her I drugged Ethan. I only told her that the consequences of her father's actions were finally catching up, and I was the one who decided how the debt would be paid. Diana looked at me, her mother, the woman she thought she knew, and saw a stranger, a woman of profound, ruthless decisions. "You destroyed my career," she stated flatly. "No, Diana. Your father's silence and the firm's history destroyed your career. I simply stopped perpetuating the silence. You have a chance now to decide what kind of person you are when the title attorney at Sterling and Hayes is stripped away." She left the house that night, not to go to work, but to drive aimlessly, to confront her own moral desert. Chapter 5, Evelyn's New Silence. The days that followed were filled with the inevitable legal and emotional fallout. Diana eventually resigned from Sterling and Hayes. It was a sinking ship. She was facing difficult questions from the Bar Association regarding her knowledge of the firm's historical cover-ups. She moved out temporarily, needing space from the architect of her professional demise, as she bitterly called me. I understood. My redemption had come at her great cost. Ethan, however, began to change. The night after the news broke, he came downstairs, his face full of quiet confusion. He held his phone, looking at the news articles. "Grandma," he asked, his voice low. "Did Grandpa really cover that up?" "Yes, Ethan. He did." "And you knew?" "Yes," I admitted, meeting his gaze directly. "And my silence was my failure. I wanted you to know that we are imperfect. We make choices out of fear, not malice. Your grandpa made his choice. I made mine." "Someone released the files," he noted, his eyes thoughtful. "Someone who cares about justice." I simply nodded. Justice often wears many faces, Ethan. Sometimes it looks like a corporate attorney, sometimes like a young hacker, and sometimes it looks like an old woman trying to set things right. He did not push for details. He only looked at me with new respect. He realized that the quiet life he saw was only the surface of deep, subterranean currents. Ethan started focusing on his college applications. He didn't write about his achievements, he wrote about ethics, moral complexity, and the heavy weight of inherited legacies. He had passed through the fire and emerged focused. He was safe. Months passed. The house in Shaker Heights settled back into a different kind of quiet. Diana started volunteering for a small non-profit legal defense fund, working on genuine environmental justice cases. She hadn't found happiness, but she had found purpose outside of her salary bracket. We talked weekly, our conversations stripped of corporate pretense, marked by a difficult, shared honesty. The wound was deep, but the healing had begun. I sat in my library now, not organizing the books, but reading them. I often thought of Silas Cole. He had achieved his vengeance, and in doing so, he had, paradoxically, offered me my own path to peace. He was the force of chaos that brought about order. I am Evelyn Thorne. I am 72. My quiet life was a lie of omission, but I have paid the price for my silence. I lost my daughter's trust, I tarnished my late husband's name, but I saved my grandson from the cycle of corporate cynicism and misplaced revenge. I look at the world differently now. I still water my orchids, but the vanilla scent no longer lulls me into false security. I know that beneath the beautiful, placid surface of my life, there are always dangers lurking, waiting for the precise moment to strike. But now, when I hear a sudden discord, I no longer try to polish it away. I stand ready. Because the best archivist knows not just how to store the truth, but how to deploy it. I pick up my teacup. The tremor in my hands is gone. The quiet of my house is now real. It is the silence of acceptance, and the preparedness of a guardian who knows that the fight is never truly over. It is the echo of deleted texts, now finally, permanently silenced.